Hi students, we're going to begin chapter 3, or we're going to do chapter 3 today. We're going to discuss and practice some strategies that you might use when you're reading at home or alone. We call it independent reading. First, before we start, please make sure you have a sharp pencil. If you'd like to highlight, make sure you have a highlighter ready. You should have a photocopy of Chapter 3 of Lyddie, and a copy of Chapter 3 Reader's Notes. That can either be a print copy or it can be on your computer from Schoology. So you can pause until you get your materials. Okay, we're going to start with Chapter 3. I want you to begin by reading the first 3 pages of Chapter 3. So I want you to read page 18, 19, and 20, and just over to the top of 21. You are welcome to use the audio file, but please follow along on paper. And as you're reading, don't forget you're going to be filling in your reader's notes, setting, and characters, and then the main plot points or the events. Okay, I want you to pause this and come back after you have read pages 18 through 20, to the top of 21 actually. Okay, so I'd like to ask you, what are some of the strategies that you use when you're reading? I want you right now to type into the comments section of this assignment, what are some of your strategies? What do you do when you read to help you to read better? Okay, I want you to pause and type in a comment or two. Okay, hopefully you typed something in the comment section. Maybe some of you wrote something like this. I reread. Okay, hopefully all of you do that. Some of the strategies of good readers are that they reread, okay, especially when they don't understand something. Okay, sometimes you try to figure out what a word means. Sometimes it doesn't matter, you can skip it, but occasionally knowing what the word means will really help you understand the whole paragraph, so it's worth taking the time. And sometimes you can figure that out from the context. Okay, another strategy is to make a picture in your mind. Good writers write descriptively so that the reader can make a picture or a movie in their mind as they read. Sometimes asking yourself a question is a good way to read. Sometimes asking questions helps you think about what you're reading. And then finally, imagining how a character feels. Sometimes that's a good reading strategy as well. Now, students, we're starting a new book, and it's quite a bit harder than A Long Walk to Water. You've probably already noticed that from Chapter 1. We're going to read the first few pages of Chapter 3, and I'm going to model for you some of the things you can do to understand the difficult text. Now, hopefully you've already read this once, okay? So now, remember the first thing that I wrote up here was that good readers, what? They reread. So we're going to do that right now. All right, so following along in your text, I'm going to read and make some comments as I read, okay? You can just follow along and listen. So we're on Chapter 3, page 18, Cutler's Tavern. For those of you who don't know, a tavern is like a restaurant. Back then it basically was mainly a place where you serve food, but I think in this particular tavern where Lyddie was working, it also was a place where people could stay. It's kind of like a hotel. Page 18. Lyddie stood outside the gate, waiting until Luke and his wagon disappeared around the curve of the road. Then she watched a pair of swallows dive and soar around the huge chimney in the center of the main house. The tavern was larger than the Stevensons' farmhouse. Addition after addition, porch, shed, and a couple of barns, the end one at least 4 stories high. The whole complex, recently painted with a mix of red ochre and buttermilk, stood against the sky like a row of giant beets popped clear of the earth. The pastures, a lush new green, were dotted with merino sheep and fat milk cows. There was a huge sugar maple in front of what must be the parlor door, and another at the porch, which, from the presence of churns and cooling pans, must lead into the kitchen. Okay, I'm trying to picture this here. So remember, Luke Stevens dropped Lyddie off at her new workplace, and I'm just trying to picture this mind. So Cutler's Tavern sounds like it's a really big building with different sections, and it sounds like they kept adding on, and it says addition after addition. So maybe it began with a house, and then they added a porch, they added a shed, added some barns, and it went higher and higher. And so it looks like a pretty big thing. So picturing this in my mind, remember, this was one of the reading strategies. To make a picture is a way of helping me to imagine this and to understand the reading. Okay? Okay, we're going to continue on. Once I walk in that gate, I ain't free anymore, she thought. No matter how handsome the house, once I enter, I'm a servant girl, no more than a black slave. She had been queen of the cabin and the straggly fields and sugar bush up there on the hill, but now someone else would call the tune. How could her mother have done such a thing? She was sure her father would be horrified. She and Charlie drudges on someone else's place. It didn't matter that plenty of poor people put out their children for hire to save having to feed them. She and Charlie could have fed themselves. Just one good harvest, one good sugaring, that's all that was needed, and they could have stayed together. Okay, we're going to pause there for a minute. I just wonder about this. She's saying, I ain't free anymore. I am no more than a black slave. By the way, what does that tell us about the setting? When is the time of this story? Okay, good. Those of you who know American history know that slavery was legal until the mid-1800s when there was a Civil War. And so this had to be before 1850. And if you remember from chapter 1, it was, I don't remember, it was like 1825 or something like that. You could look back at chapter 1. So this is when slavery was still legal, and she's comparing herself to a slave, okay? And she's really mad at her mother for doing this to her and Charlie. So I wonder, is this going to be true? Will she really be like a slave? So the reading strategy that I'm using right now, I'm asking, will she be like a slave? So I'm asking myself a question, okay? I'm also imagining how she feels. She's told us how she feels, okay? She said here, how could her mother have done such a thing? I'm just imagining that she is angry. Okay, continuing on. She was startled out of her dreaming by a hideous roar, and before she could figure out what animal could have made such a noise, a stagecoach appeared. Wait a minute. What is making such a roar? A roar is a big noise, and hideous means ugly. So she's kind of daydreaming, and she hears this big noise, and then she's asking what kind of animal, and then it says, a stagecoach appeared, drawn by 2 spans of sweating Morgan horses. Okay, even if I don't know what span means, even if I don't know what sweating or Morgan means, I do know what a horse is. So I think, since it's such a hideous noise, and it's something being pulled by horses, then it sounds like it's a big wagon. Okay, so these horses were shaking their great heads, showing their fierce teeth, saliva foaming on their iron bits. The coach had rounded the curve, its horn bellowing. The driver was yelling as well. And then, just in time, she realized that he was yelling at her. I wonder why he's yelling at her. What do you guys think? We'll find out. She jumped hard against the wall. He was still yelling back at her as he pulled up the reins, the coach itself now on the very spot where she had been standing seconds before. Okay, so the driver was yelling at her. Why was he yelling? Yeah, because he almost hit her. Okay, now this happens today. It's just like a kid, maybe, or not a kid, anyone, standing in the middle of the road and a car not seeing them, and all of a sudden seeing them at the last minute and beeping their horn because they almost hit that kid. Okay, so here my reading strategy is that I'm making a picture. Okay, I'm imagining here somebody standing on a modern day street and a car coming along and beeping their horn. Okay, get out of the way, get out of the way. That's what it was like. A big stagecoach with all these horses is like today's cars. Okay? All right, let's continue. Should she apologize? No, he wasn't paying her any attention now. He was turning the team over to a boy who had run out of the shed. Oh, wait, I forgot the other reading strategy here we use is trying to figure out what a word means, okay? We didn't know at first what a stagecoach was, but we figured it out because it was being drawn or pulled by horses. And so, because it was more than one horse, we figured out, oh, it's probably like a big wagon. All right. So, back to the reading on page 19. He was turning the team over to a boy who had run out of the shed. A woman was hurrying out of the kitchen door to welcome the passengers who were climbing stiffly from the coach. Lyddie stared. They were very grand looking. One of the gentlemen, a man in a beaver hat and frilled shirt, turned to hand a woman down the coach step. The lady's face was hidden by a fancy straw bonnet, the brim decorated with roses that matched her gown. Was it silk? Lyddie couldn't be sure, never having seen a real silk dress before, but it was smooth and pink like a baby's cheek. Around her shoulders the lady wore a shawl woven in a deeper shade of pink. Lyddie marveled that the woman would wear something so delicate for a ride to the Northland in a dusty coach. Safely on the ground, the woman lifted her head and looked about her. Her face was thin and white, her features elegant. She caught Lyddie's eyes and smiled. It was a very nice smile, not at all haughty. Lyddie realized that she had been staring. She closed her mouth and quickly looked away. Okay, I'm really trying to picture this in my mind. This woman is dressed so nicely. She must look so different from Lyddie because Lyddie's staring at her. I wonder what not haughty means. Okay, it says here that she had a very nice smile, not haughty. So I can picture Lyddie. She's sorry, I'm going to reread the sentence, see if I can figure out what not haughty means. So if it says that she has a nice smile, which is not haughty, then haughty must be something negative, something bad, and it probably really doesn't matter to the meaning here about that, okay? Except if you think about it, if you try to imagine your own experience, have you ever been around people who were dressed really fancy and maybe they had some really high position and maybe they ignored you, or you know, you guys are children, so you probably don't experience this, but sometimes people with high positions kind of look down on other people, especially if they're dressed poorly. And Lyddie just came from a farm, and anyway, let's keep going, all right? All right, we're going to start now at the top of page 20. Then the encounter was over, for the stout woman who had come out of the kitchen door was hustling the lady, her escort, and two other passengers through the low gate and around to the main door at the north end of the tavern. Suddenly she saw Lyddie. She came over to the wall and whispered hoarsely across it to her. "What are you doing here?" She was looking Lyddie up and down as she asked, as though Lyddie were a stray dog who had wandered too close to her house. Lyddie was aware, as she might not have been minutes before, that she had no bonnet, that means hat, and that her hair and braids were dusty from the road. She crossed her arms, trying to cover her worn brown homespun with the gunny sack. The dress was tight across her newly budding chest, and it hung unevenly to just above her ankles in a ragged hem. Her brown feet were bare, her outgrown boots still slung over her shoulder. She should have remembered to put them on before she got off Luke's wagon. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a minute. I'm going to picture Lyddie. She's dirty and dressed in rags. I wonder what homespun means. Okay, so here we have a word that is unfamiliar. Okay, a new word, homespun. Well, I'm going to reread that part and see if I can figure it out. Okay, so going back here, she crossed her arms trying to cover her worn brown homespun with the gunny sack. The dress was tight. So this is a dress, and I know that even though I don't know what homespun is, I know spun comes from the word spin, and I know that they spun wool. Okay, so if it was spun at home, I think that might mean homemade. So she has homemade clothes on. And it gives us the idea she looks a lot different from the fancy lady. Well, I know how that feels. I've been in situations where I was definitely underdressed. So trying to put myself in Lyddie's shoes helps me to understand this better. She probably felt kind of embarrassed about being dressed a little bit and being dirty from her trip. Okay, so homespun is a new word that probably means homemade. Okay, let's continue on. Self-consciously, she raised her sleeve and wiped her nose and mouth under the woman's unforgiving stare. "Go along," the woman was saying. "This is a respectable tavern, not the township poor farm." Remember that word, the poor farm? It's where back then they would send families who couldn't feed themselves. Lyddie could feel the rage oozing up like sap on a March morning. She cleared her throat and stood up straight. "I'm Lydia Worthen," she said. "I got a letter from my mother." The woman looked horrified. "You're the new girl?" "I reckon I am," Lyddie said, clutching her gunny sack more tightly. "Well, I've no time to bother with you now," the woman said. "Go into the kitchen and ask Tryphena to tell you where you can wash. We keep a clean place here." Lyddie bit her lip to keep from answering back. She looked straight into the woman's face until the woman blinked and turned, running a little to catch up with the guests who were waiting for her at the main door. Okay, who do you think that woman is? Yeah, she's probably the owner of the place. And she just realized that Lyddie is the new girl who's come there to work, and she's not very happy about it. Okay, students, I'm going to stop there with my reading, and I want you to take a minute right now to look at your reader's notes, okay? So if you haven't gotten it out yet, just pause this and get this out. Again, you can do it on the computer or the print copy. All right, so what has happened so far in this chapter? Okay, that will go in the plot right here, okay? You write down a few things. Okay, so you may have written, Lyddie arrives at the tavern. Lyddie sees a woman who's dressed nicely. Maybe Lyddie realizes that she's kind of dressed in rags herself. Anything you want, okay? It's up to you what you put here. Now, not a whole lot has happened so far. Now you're going to continue reading this on your own so you can add more things here, okay? But you could put the setting, okay? Don't forget, this is time and place. Yeah, Cutler's Tavern is where it's happening. And again, this just happened still the same day as when Luke dropped them off. Okay, characters so far are Lyddie, and we'll just call it the tavern mistress. We're not quite sure who she is right now, okay? And the only plot point I'm going to put here is that Lyddie arrives at new job. Okay? Now, these questions, what do Tryphena and Mistress Cutler think of Lyddie when she arrives? You can only answer a question about Mistress. Okay? So Mistress thinks Lyddie is dirty. Okay? And but she doesn't have time to deal with her yet. And as you read the chapter, you'll find more things, and you'll definitely find out more. We haven't even met Tryphena yet, and so you'll find out what Tryphena thinks of Lyddie as well. And as you continue reading, I want you to look for this answers to this question. What are the working conditions like in the tavern? Okay, students, that's all for my lesson right here. I want you now to finish reading the chapter, and I want you to please fill in if there's any other changes in the setting, and as you add characters, and then what happens, add the plot points, okay? And answer these two questions. Okay, when you're done with that, please submit it, or if you're doing it on paper, hand it in. Thank you.